Hello. I want to thank you all for joining us for our first ever Opportunities in the Food System webinar for Black men. We've got a really jam-packed opportunity for you to hear from three of our Food and Society Policy Fellows, Malik Yakini, Haile Johnston, and Kelvin Graddick, who are going to talk to you about their roles in the food system, how they came to come to do this work, and opportunities that they see for you to get involved or for you to spread the word on creating a more equitable food system. This is a part of the Fellows IATP Fellows Program. It has a long history, and Kelvin, Malik, and Haile are a part of our class 8 of fellows. There are 14. I think there are 14 fellows, and this is our most diverse class of fellows doing food system work. And the people that you really want to hear from are our speakers. So, with further ado, I'll turn it over to Malik.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. This is Malik Yakini. I'm Executive Director of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. And the presentation today is called Food for Thought, Fostering Self-Determination in African American Communities. And Abby, I'm not seeing the PowerPoint up on my screen. If you can put that up while I'm doing the introduction.
Yeah.
What I'd like to do today.
Sorry, Malik, you can just bring it right up on your screen. We can see whatever is on your screen. So if you just bring up the PowerPoint that's on your actual computer.
Okay, it's going to take just a minute, but I'll keep talking while I'm doing that. One of the things I want to present today is some of the history of the involvement of Africans with agriculture, and some of the work that we're doing in Detroit to reframe our agricultural work so that people of African descent don't see it as being related to our enslavement or sharecropping similar experiences. So I guess the first thing that is important for us to know is that agriculture, we have records of agriculture developing in the Nile Valley region of Northeast Africa as far back as 5,000 years ago. And information on that can be obtained from Ivan Van Sertima's book called Blacks in Science, and he documents that Africans were involved in both agriculture and animal husbandry more than 5,000 years ago in the Nile Valley region. Abby, is my slideshow up yet? Are you seeing it?
Not yet. How about I'll just bring it up on my computer and just tell me when to switch slides.
Okay. Okay, is it up, Abby?
Yes, it is.
Food system. Good, but okay. I'm moderating, but I got a break, so I just figured I would call you to tell you.
Okay, let's go to the second slide, Abby.
There you
go. Okay, so again, this is a photograph taken from one of the tomb walls in ancient Kemet showing Africans involved in both production of wheat and also raising cattle. Next slide. But also on this side of the Atlantic, Africans played a significant role in the introduction of commercial agriculture to the Western Hemisphere, particularly the cultivation of rice. In fact, the cultivation of rice in America on a commercial level began with African rice, African know-how, and African labor, and all of that's documented in the book by Judith Carney called Black Rice. So what's not often known is that there was an indigenous variety of rice called Glaberrima rice grown in West Africa, which had not been imported from Asia, which is the story that's often told. This was an indigenous African rice variety, and Africans for hundreds and hundreds of years had developed the technologies associated with growing that rice, preparing the rice in terms of hulling it, and milling it, and also of cooking the rice. And so as a result of the so-called transatlantic slave trade, that rice made its way to the Western Hemisphere. In fact, what would happen is the slave traders would buy rice in West Africa, put it in the hulls of the ships transporting the captive Africans to the Western Hemisphere in order to feed them on the voyage, which was somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks. When they got to the Western Hemisphere, they'd often have rice left over, which they would sell to the planters in South Carolina and Georgia, which is how the commercial cultivation of rice began in the United States. But also, the enslavers began to really target specific ethnic groups in Africa who had a history of growing rice, and they would enslave those Africans who had that skill set and bring them here to the Western Hemisphere. And it was those Africans who had this tradition of rice cultivation who really taught the planters in South Carolina and Georgia how to cultivate rice on a large scale and how to process that rice once it was cultivated. Next slide. But in addition to rice, several other foods have made their way to the Western Hemisphere from the African continent, including yams, not the sweet potatoes that we often eat at Thanksgiving, but the yams that are pictured in the lower right-hand corner of this slide. Also, sesame made its way from Africa to the United States. Sorghum, which is often used for cattle in this country, but also can be eaten by humans. Watermelon, collard greens, and okra are other foods that are native to the African continent and found their way to the Western Hemisphere as a result of the so-called transatlantic slave trade. Next slide. So it's very important as we're looking at the relationship of Africans to agriculture in this country that we never forget the enslavement of our people and the fact that millions of Africans were enslaved over a period of more than 240 years, which provided a free labor force that generated tremendous profits for both the southern planters and the northern industrialists. So enslavement was not just something that benefited the whites in the South, but it benefited the economy of the entire United States. Next slide. So part of our work, for those of us who are involved in food system work, and particularly agriculture, is reframing this work because blacks throughout the Western Hemisphere seem to have an identification of agricultural work with slavery, with sharecropping, and various other forms of tenant farming, various forms of farming that basically used the labor of Africans but did not allow Africans to reap the benefits of their labor. It essentially enriched the whites who were the owners of the land. Next slide. So part of what we have to do as we're moving forward with our work is to reframe this work so that we're demonstrating that agriculture and other food system work can be acts of community self-determination. They can be acts that build wealth and power in our own communities as opposed to the systems of farming that we participated in under slavery and sharecropping where our labor enriched somebody else. Next slide. So the reality is land is the basis of power, and that as we're looking at food insecurity throughout the world, and we're looking at food justice and food sovereignty, an essential issue that we have to examine is the ownership of land, because the fact that large tracts of land are being amassed in the hands of wealthy individuals throughout the world, and this has happened over the last several hundred years, is one of the reasons that we see food insecurity. When people are removed from the land or removed from having access to the land, it makes them dependent upon those who own the land for the basic materials from which we kind of construct our lives in modern society. For example, everything that we eat in some way comes directly or indirectly from the land. Most of our clothing comes from fibers which are produced on the land. Our housing is constructed from materials that comes from the earth. Our art is often produced from materials that come from the earth, and industry also is created from raw materials that are extracted from the land. Next slide. So under this present system, those who do not own land become wage slaves, essentially working for those who do own the land and who have the capital to develop industry on that land. So then the rest of us have to go out and work jobs in order to pay for things like food. and to pay for housing and to pay for transportation. Whereas if we had access to land and the resources that come from the land, we could provide those things for ourselves. Next slide. Another tremendous problem as we're talking about agriculture among blacks in the U.S. is the phenomenon of black land loss. And we're seeing a steady decline in the amount of land which is owned by blacks generally, but particularly the land which is used for farming. As the slide shows you, in 1910, there were over 15 million acres of farmland owned by blacks in the United States. By 1997, that number had dropped to 2.4 million. And so there's a variety of reasons for that land loss, including sometimes losing land to taxes, including sometimes when someone dies, they don't have a good will, and their heirs don't inherit the land. It ends up going to the state. Of course, we know there's been a trickery throughout our history, which has removed black people from their land. And also I want to point out that there's really a global land grab going on now, which is a continuation of the kind of imperialistic policies that we've seen on the part of European countries over the last several hundred years. And so that land grab is affecting both the African continent, where large tracts of land are being used by both Arab countries, Asian countries, and European countries to grow food in Africa. And also we're seeing in urban areas throughout the United States, such as Detroit, the attempt by wealthy individuals to buy large tracts of land and deprive the majority population in those cities from having access to what should be commonly owned land. Next slide. So there's two major obstacles that really we're faced with as we're looking at how we create global food sovereignty. And those two phenomena are white supremacy, which is a global system which suggests that the culture and the history of people who identify as white is superior to those to the history and culture of people of African descent and other people of color throughout the world. But it's not just a mindset, it's actually an economic, political, and cultural system that continues to show favor and give privilege to people who have white skin and continues to oppress and suppress and repress people whose skin is not white. The other major obstacle, of course, is capitalism, this global economic system which amasses wealth in the hands of a few and causes the rest of us to have to work for those few, and our labor enriches them and really doesn't do much to accumulate wealth and power within our communities. Next slide. So since we're particularly focused on black men for this webinar, one of the things that we have to do in order to be effective change agents in our community is that we have to work on transforming ourselves as well as our communities. So black men in particular have a big work to do to heal ourselves from the damage that's been done by living in a white supremacist society. We also have a tremendous work to do to heal ourselves from living in a chauvinistic society and getting rid of notions that suppress women and don't allow women to realize their full potential. And we have to heal ourselves of all of the notions that are not fit for people who are trying to be free, proud, and self-determining. And so that's an ongoing work which is best done in concert with others, in groups, in concert with others who are attempting to transform themselves. So we have this dual work of both transforming our communities and of transforming ourselves individually in concert with others going through the same transformation. Next slide. So I'm an advocate of black food sovereignty, and in the 1960s, Malcolm X and many others advised us to internationalize our struggle. Malcolm, as the Honorable Marcus Garvey before him, understood that cooperation among and between Africans everywhere has to be the basis for our liberation, and the reality is living in a global white supremacist system that it would be foolish for African people not to unite and to look out for our own interests in every area of life, including in the area of production and distribution of food. And so I'm advocating that we look at the food movement through a Pan-Africanist lens. Next slide. We would be well served by adopting the principles of food sovereignty, which were developed by Via Campesina. And those principles are on the screen now. The first and most basic principle is that food is a basic human right. It doesn't matter what your economic station in life is. As a result of being a human being on this earth, you have the right to adequate amounts of culturally appropriate, high-quality food. And so that supersedes the efforts or supersedes the rights that corporations have asserted for themselves to commodify food and to sell food for tremendous profits. The right of human beings to eat and sustain our lives supersedes any kind of profit motive. The second principle of food sovereignty is land reform. That, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, that one of the major problems is land is amassed in the hands of a few wealthy individuals. And so if we're truly to have justice and equality in the world, we have to relook at this notion of land ownership and land use and reimagine how land is used so that it works for the majority of people instead of for just a few individuals. Protecting natural resources is very important. Of course, we want this movement to be sustainable. Reorganizing food trade, and again, this deals with the commodity, seeing food as a commodity, ending the globalization of hunger, and again, because the systems that oppress us are global, we find that that hunger and the causes of hunger are also global. Social peace and democratic control are the final two principles of food sovereignty as laid out by Via Campesina. Next slide. Embedded in that definition of food sovereignty are the concepts of food security, food justice, and environmental stewardship. That if we're practicing the principles of food sovereignty as laid out by Via Campesina, we are also practicing and promoting food security, food justice, and environmental stewardship. Next slide. So there's a number of opportunities for black men and black people in particular in the food system. And if we look at it as a whole systems approach, there's opportunities at every level of the food system, including farming. And of course, because of our work here in Detroit, we're very interested in getting more blacks involved in farming, both urban and rural farming. There's tremendous job opportunities which can be created because sometimes these jobs don't exist. We have to take the initiative to create them. But there's tremendous job opportunities in processing and packaging food. There's tremendous opportunities in the distribution and marketing of food. There's tremendous opportunities for wholesaling and retailing of food. We have the responsibility of working wherever we are to create sound, just policies that regulate how food is made accessible to people. And then finally, at the end of the food cycle, there's tremendous opportunities for composting and recycling the materials that are used in the production of food. Next slide. So the bottom line, I always like to end with a quote from one of my favorite hip-hop groups, Dead Prez. They say, let's get free. And in that picture, you see our farm manager at D-Town Farm, Kwame Mensa, and in the black vest, and Kadiri Snefer, our compost manager, in the red pullover. And if you can go to the last slide, and that will give my contact information. If people would like more information on the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, they can contact us at our website, which is www.detroitblackfoodsecurity.org. And also, as part of my work with the fellowship, I have a website called Be Black and Green, and that site includes interviews and blogs and photographs of black farmers, gardeners, and food activists throughout the country. And that site is www.beblackandgreen.com. And with that, I'd like to pass it on to my brother, Haile Johnston.
Thanks, Malik. Much appreciated. Again, my name is Haile Johnston. I'm a founder and director of the Common Market Philadelphia. We are a nonprofit local food distribution organization, again, operating in the Philadelphia region of Pennsylvania. Effectively, our mission is to serve and connect rural agricultural communities and the urban marketplace, especially underserved, low-income communities. And one of the reasons why I feel like this is especially significant, many people call us a food hub, and we're often referred to within the food hub movement. One of the reasons I find this important is we are one of the very few African American and minority-led food distribution, regional food distribution organizations that I've come to know about in America. And especially one of the very few and the only one in our region that has access to institutional food service. So to hospitals, schools, elder care facilities, colleges and universities, and then also becoming a major supplier to supermarkets and retail chains. But what I want to talk about today is actually, first of all, sort of my pathway into this work, because I think it's important to understand how folks get into work when thinking about where the opportunities are. And finally, also I'd like to highlight an area where I see having the greatest potential for African American men to impact food sovereignty and food security in African American communities. So my path, it's kind of funny, you know, I had to actually go back before when I thought it began. I had to go back to my youth and my interactions with my own family, and the fact that we had a garden in our backyard. So from the time from the time I can remember, actually, you know, I have fond memories of spending time with my parents in the garden, you know, working the soil on our own land, you know, behind our own home. Years later, I also, as a teenager, helped my father sell pumpkins around Thanksgiving and Halloween holidays out on the corner in Philadelphia. And you know, a couple years after that, my father bought a produce truck, and we used to set up outside of supermarkets, sort of as hucksters, if you will, moving produce to you know, more affordable produce to folks in our community. Incredibly fond memories, and I think formative experiences that have shaped my energy as an entrepreneur, and my I'm going to say also my efficacy with respect to the food system, and my ability to really believe that I think African American men can play any role that anyone else plays within the food system. But it was many years after that until actually I became connected, I think, to the food movement as an activist and as an advocate. And it was really a returning to my roots through the very strong and rich community gardening movement in Philadelphia. My wife and I were new to a community there. It's called Strawberry Mansion. And one of the first things we did in our neighborhood is start interacting with the older residents of the community who had been tilling vacant land in our neighborhood for a number of years. So for us, it was an immediate way to connect to our community and then also play a role in revitalizing our community, as we, you know, as many urban African American neighborhoods suffer from abandonment and blight. The vacant land that's left behind is an opportunity to actually create a degree of food sovereignty and produce food ourselves. It was through this work, through working with children in our community, also around community gardens, that I became aware of an opportunity to become a nutrition educator. I worked for the Urban Nutrition Initiative in Philadelphia, and got to work firsthand with children in my neighborhood and others around not just growing food, but cooking food and enjoying food as a group and as a community. It was very much that experience that enlightened my wife and I to the health disparities that existed in our community. It was beginning to see the eating habits of our youth and beginning to connect the dots from poor eating habits to growing incidence of diet-related disease, obviously diabetes and obesity, which made us say, hey, there has to be a way that we can do something to impact this, which was really the basis of the Common Market, our food distribution company. What we realized was that people in our community, ourselves included, just didn't have access to good food anymore. We were stuck shopping at corner stores, and in Philadelphia, unfortunately, the corner stores don't carry fresh produce or anything that isn't processed and shelf stable. So we began to look at how we could connect farmers in our region to the urban marketplace, to communities like ours. Really, and this really began, our motivation was to find ways to heal our community, to find ways to actually create self-determination around food, not always growing every bit of it, but connecting us directly to the folks who are growing and have competencies around food production in our region, in addition to producing our own food. And having done this work for a number of years, we took a strategy where we thought, and actually still think, and are successful right now in sort of proving this hypothesis, that we needed to actually create a degree of scale if we were going to grow our enterprise to a place where we were going to have impact on communities, making this food more affordable and accessible, as well as begin to not just impact institutional food service, but have a more profound impact on household level consumption within our own community and communities like ours. And one of the things that's gotten me really excited is sort of through this path of launching and growing Common Market, which now has been distributing food for a little more than 4 years, we've finally gotten around to this place where we're having household level impact, and that's through a community-supported agriculture looking program. We actually call it a farm share that comes every 2 weeks to workplaces and faith-based institutions. It's a pay-as-you-go model, which is pretty different than traditional community-supported agriculture or CSA programs, and it's where I see us actually beginning to have that real impact again on communities, and especially through the faith-based institutions. And so this gets to where I see really one of the greatest ways that African American men in particular can have an impact on community food security, sovereignty, self-determination, and playing a role in helping people have access to much stronger food and shifting the culture around consumption within our communities. It's within faith-based institutions. And many of the churches in black communities, I'll speak for my own community, are run by men and strongly supported as well by our sisters, but often have men at the front of the room, men as the spiritual and cultural leaders within our communities. And I think there is a profound opportunity for African American men within the faith-based communities, and this is really speaking broadly across religions, to play this role in incorporating good food, cooking, coming together as a community around food and food preparation. You know, it's really about reviving this part of our culture that has actually been slipping away for a number of years. And so one of the things that I'm excited about as a fellow with IATP is the opportunity to engage faith communities around this new opportunity. And we've been growing our as we call it, our Farms of Faith program, developing faith partners in communities around Philadelphia. And it's an area where I'm excited to see grow, not just in our region, but potentially nationally, where, again, where faith leaders take the lead role in changing our culture around food consumption and facilitating good food coming into the community through faith infrastructure. So with that, I will say one of our most profound frustrations in working in the food movement and connecting people to good food in our region is our inability to connect African American farmers. We've done everything that we can and actually continue to try to source food from African American farmers in the Northeast, but it's incredibly challenging for many of the reasons that Malik laid out, which is why I'm really excited to introduce to you my brother Kelvin Graddick, and who is going to talk to you about his experience in producing food and his work with his community in Georgia. So Kelvin, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much, Haile. Hello, everyone. My name is Kelvin Graddick, and I manage the revitalization of a 50-year-old co-op, the West Georgia Farmers Cooperative, which my family helped to start. We aim to create economic opportunities in agriculture and access to healthy, affordable food for our community. But today in this webinar, I kind of want to zoom in and discuss the role of young black men in agriculture, and also discuss a little bit about my work in Georgia. I personally fit the description as a young black male, and I hope to encourage more people that look like me to become interested in agriculture and pursue agricultural careers. If you could bear with me, my slide changes are going to be a little slow. I want to begin discussing the current condition of young black male roles in agriculture. There's an obvious lack of young black males in agricultural roles, but why is that? Well, first, old hindering stigmas from the past. Historically, young black men have worked hard to leave farming behind just because of the stigma that sharecropping and slavery that's attached with farming, much like Malik said. Their parents and grandparents fought to leave farming behind and their land behind because of forms of wage slavery and the belief that it was not very profitable anymore. Young black males also suffer from land loss and the lack of fair government support in the past. And one example of that would be the Pickford versus Goodman case. However, the future for young black males in agriculture is bright, considering the opportunities and interests that's out there. And now I want to try to move on to talking about exactly how I got in this work. There's not a lot of people that look like me in this work, and I'm looking to change that, but I just want to start with my story. I grew up in Harris County, Georgia, a rural county where blacks are the minority in population. I felt kind of like I was generations removed from farming. My grandparents went from farming full time to no farming at all, and my parents did not farm. And actually in school, agricultural careers were never really shared with me as a viable option, even considering that most of my schoolmates' families sat on acres and acres of land. However, my family still owns a lot of land, and they often share stories with me about farming and a farmers cooperative that they actually helped to start. Back in the 60s, my family and other African-American families needed the cooperative to share equipment and produce the necessary volumes of produce that institutions needed for big contracts with big institutions such as food freezing plants and processing plants. These opportunities helped to hinder the economic disparities that existed during that time, and also racial injustice that existed during that time. These stories that they told me really excited me when I was young. And so when I got older, even while attending college as a computer science major, I developed an urge to want to better the economic and food landscape of Harris County. It really, really disturbed me that we couldn't get much produce locally and had to drive at least 30 minutes into the next town. It was also kind of disturbing that some of the same economic issues that plagued my family 50 years ago still plague many families today. And most of these families in Harris County are living on acre after acre of land. So my family and I began to look into restarting a farmers cooperative to help people find these economic opportunities in agriculture and to provide healthy, affordable food for our community. Over the past year, we've provided agriculture opportunities for young black men in our community and actually hope to inspire more and more people of my demographic in the near future. In a nutshell, I was brought to this work by a desire to make social changes in my community that I love. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to do a slide change here. And actually, I just want to talk about food is one of the things that everybody has in common, and it connects us all, from a 23-year-old black computer science farmer to a 65-year-old white farmer. So it's very something that we can all connect on. And my next slide is I want to talk about the new roles that young black men have in the food system. So what are these new roles? Well, along with roles as farmers and agribusiness leaders, it is responsibility of current young black men in agriculture like myself to still encourage more young males to come into this type of career. We need to show them that these type of careers are viable now and that there is help out there for them. We must build more young black leaders and share knowledge about the issues that plague us, because I feel that people will care if they know the issues. I think they care that they don't have access to food or they don't have access to opportunities, but just a little knowledge goes a long way. Young black men must now accept the leadership roles in agriculture businesses and must not be discriminated against. Young black men in agriculture also have the role to improve their community, which suffers from health issues, low healthy food access, and a lack of government assistance, especially in beginning agriculture careers. Current young black men in agriculture have the role to break these stigmas that are really separating them from new and socially and culturally driven farming today, which is really altered the view of farming for many. But young black men still suffer from those old stigmas and still being in that old mindset. And what I'm saying in this webinar not only should be applied to young black men, but to young just black people in general. And I'm going to slide change here. So what are some of the current opportunities now for assisting for emerging young black agriculturalists? Well, first, one that I've recently come onto was the Minority Students in Agriculture, Natural Resources, and Related Scientists, called MANRS for short. MANRS is a national society that welcomes membership of people of all racial and ethnic groups' participation in agricultural and related scientist careers. And they do a lot to help young people coming out of high school, really lets them know that agricultural careers are an option. It doesn't push them into anything, but it does give them the knowledge they need if they would like to start a career in agriculture. And also the National Young Farmers Coalition. NYFC works for young farmers by strengthening their social networks, helping them to hone their skills through the facilitation of peer-to-peer learning, and fighting for the policies that will keep them farming for a lifetime. And one that we use a lot at the cooperative that really helps us get back on our feet is the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. The Federation strives toward the development of self-supporting communities with programs that increase income and enhance other opportunities. And they strive to assist in land retention and development, especially for African Americans, but essentially for everyone. And last but not least, the National Black Farmers Association. The National Black Farmers Association education and advocacy efforts have been focused on civil rights, land retention, access to public and private loans, education, and agricultural training, and rural economic development for black and other small farmers. Change my slide here. And that concludes my talk. I want to thank everybody for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the pictures and the information. Thank you for the time. And actually, my information is here. I have a new Tumblr site that follows our work with pictures, videos. I'm on Twitter at Kelvin Graddick, and my email is below. It's easy, kelvingraddick@gmail.com. Thank you. And I want to pass it back to Andrea for questions and for closing. Thank you.
Yes, all great presentations. If you, listeners and participants in the webinar, would like to ask questions, please plug your questions into the question form and we'll get them out there. While you're loading in your questions, I just want to tell you a couple of things. One of our participants and fellow Malik is a new James Beard Award winner for his work in the food movement, and I think that he would be quick to tell you that he is a part of a team and it doesn't happen alone, but their work is being elevated to the masses through this award, and we're really excited about that. And Kelvin's Tumblr on what it takes to be a young black farmer is growing by leaps and bounds every day, and we encourage you to follow him. and Haile's work is also a fabulous progress. While we're waiting on your questions, I have a question for the three of them, which is, and if each of you would take a little time to get into this. At this point, what is the most challenging part of taking this work on as a career? I'll start out with Malik.
Okay, well, the most challenging part right now is really trying to shift the mindset of our people. And so we have two things that we're up against. One, we're up against this kind of general American popular culture, which suggests to us that we cede areas of our life to experts, that we turn over parts of our life to experts. And so doctors are responsible for our health. Our professional educators are responsible for the development of our minds. And multinational corporations that control the dominant food system are responsible for providing food to us. And so that's a problem that affects people in American society in general. But people of African descent have a particular challenge, of course, because we are one of the most oppressed segments of society. So even within this society where you have experts providing for the masses of people, the level of service that we get or the quality of food that we get is markedly different than what the dominant society has. So that's one problem that we have. And then the other problem is the problem I talked about, and also Kelvin hit on, which is related to our history and our identification of agricultural work with slavery and sharecropping. And so we have a really, really important work to do. First, teaching our people that African people were involved in agriculture centuries prior to enslavement, and that essentially African people have always been earth-based people, and that, as my elder Tariq Aduno in Washington, D.C. says, there's no culture without agriculture. So the biggest challenge we're faced with right now is a paradigm shift in our thinking, so that we step up and we accept responsibility for at least growing portions of our food and creating a food system to make sure that our communities are food secure.
Heidi, you got anything you want to chime in on with that in terms of the biggest challenge you see?
Yeah, what I'll add to that is in my work as a social enterprise, access to capital is a huge challenge for minorities in general, but African Americans in particular. And I don't mean just access to debt and investment capital. I also mean, as a nonprofit organization, access to grant funding. And as you know, when we were in the process of getting our project off the ground, we faced incredible challenges gaining the support of foundations in our region who actually, you know, whose mission it is to support organizations like ours. But because we didn't come from the same communities as the program officers, because we're not part of, or you know, we hadn't been part of that scene, you know, they would consistently pass us by when we would seek funding opportunities, even though we were proposing and proving concepts that were cutting edge, or are cutting edge still, and are really shifting, you know, actually playing a role in shifting the paradigm of food security in minority communities. And so I would just say broadly access to capital, but I'd also like to flip the question and say that with all of the challenges, my experience working in the food movement as you know, a leader of sorts, if you will, but certainly just in the work that we've been doing, has been the most gratifying work that I've ever done in my entire life. And I would say that the pleasure and the benefits far outweigh the challenges.
Kelvin?
Yes, I definitely ditto everything my brother said there, and especially ditto access to capital grants, especially for rural areas like mine that sometimes get underserved and overlooked. And there's also kind of a stigma that you kind of have to be, especially in Georgia, you have to be in Atlanta to be doing anything big or you know, worthwhile or community changing. And I want to also speak on, being young, being youthful. Our mindsets haven't changed yet, especially in this new food system movement, kind of like people of other races have. And it's hard to deal with sometimes for me, especially kind of feeling alone in some places. But like Haile said, the work is very gratifying, and I look forward to a positive future because there's a lot of gateways for positive change. So that's all I have to say.
And I remind you again, if you have questions, please sign in and give us your questions as we coming to close.
Andrea, all the questions are coming in through I'm sending them through the chat function. If you could see some of those, otherwise I can go ahead and ask them.
Okay. I am not seeing them, Abby.
Okay. I can go ahead and ask a couple.
Oh, you can ask them, but let me just quickly say that one of the most enlightening things that I've had an opportunity to see was in Detroit at D-Town Farms, and then when we went to Oakland and visited Hank Herrera's project, to see so many young men who had been marginalized in the system and just couldn't quite get their sea legs have found new energy and new hope for themselves and their lives, and job creation in food growing, food entrepreneurship. So there is really some traction to be had there. So if you get a chance to go visit programs that are doing positive things, it can really help shape the way that you look at the food work for people of color. I also would be neglectful if I didn't say it's not just growing, but you don't hear a lot about black men or black women who are the chefs in our country. And one of my fellow class fellows, Bryant Terry, has been doing brilliant work using his cooking ability to share information about the food system and sustainable food, being healthier, and his perspective as a black man trying to secure food for his community. Okay, Abby, ask the questions.
Great, thanks. We've had a couple questions come in about policy, so I'll ask one, and I hope that covers some other folks' questions as well. Here's one. Creating change, you come against structural barriers that are in place because of policies. Can you speak about whether and how you balance your on-the-ground work with any work you do to change policies? And what strategies for policy change have you found most powerful? Anyone want to take a stab at that one?
Well, I'll start. This is Malik. And in Detroit, we started the Detroit Food Policy Council. And it really grew out of work of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, and then got broad support by a number of people in the Detroit community because we did understand that while the on-the-ground work is important, it's also important to create a policy environment that supports the current work and also supports new work that will come. So we were able to write and get a policy accepted by the Detroit City Council, but that's only one kind of the first step, because you can have a wonderful policy document that just sits on the shelf. So now we're trying to really push the city government to implement the things in that policy, and the Food Policy Council is implementing some of the things as well. So we've got a little more traction with the City Council than we have with the Mayor's office, and we're working. In fact, we met with the Mayor's top representative a couple of weeks ago to try to forge a closer relationship between the Mayor's office and the Detroit Food Policy Council. So frankly, that's been a struggle. And so although many people around the country are looking at what we've done with the creation of the Detroit Food Policy Council, we haven't really gotten as far as we'd like to in terms of actually implementing this progressive policy that has been written. But some of the things that we do is we meet individually with city council members, we meet individually with the mayor, with his representatives, and we're really trying to raise the consciousness of the elected and appointed officials in Detroit about the role that the food system plays in reimagining what our city will be. Frankly, we're building on some of the work that was initiated by people like Dr. Kami Patakuchi, who's here in Detroit, and Wayne Roberts, who formerly headed the Toronto Food Policy Council, who advocated several years ago that foodies adopt an urban planner in order to try to get them to see that food is an essential element and planning how cities develop. So it's a very important work. We made some strides forward, but we have much more to do in Detroit.
Thanks, Malik. Do Haile or Kelvin want to add anything to that, or should I ask a different one?
Maybe take another question.
Yeah, great. I've got a question for Kelvin here, and then if Haile or Malik want to add, we've gotten a couple about making living wages, and that might be something all of you can add to, but specifically for Kelvin here, I know Kelvin and many other young people have embraced farming recently, but can they make money at such a small scale? And any tips that Kelvin or anyone else can provide for new farmers trying to make a living?
Okay, well, I wrote back something. I said I encourage young starting farmers to start farming small scale and part-time with something they can kind of keep their hands around that's low risk. And then from there, proper planning and development can then provide the framework for growing a full-time farm business. And then also using organizations such as cooperatives and Federation of Southern Cooperatives will increase the chance and reduce the risk that comes with starting any business, you know. So.
Thanks, Kelvin. Haile or Malik, do you have anything to add about living wage? Here's one for Haile. One second. Someone's wondering if you can talk a little bit more about some of the farm to faith work and what role can Black churches in particular and faith communities in general play in making a better food system for our communities?
Yeah, absolutely. What drew me to the opportunity to work within the faith community in Black communities, in our community to begin with, is the rich culture of bringing people together around food that is shared actually by all faiths. And what I saw as a critical opportunity, because faith leaders have such a strong cultural sway over their congregations or parishes or whatever the construct of the particular religion is. And so just from a pure leadership perspective, and one of my views is that it often takes a strong leader to actually affect real cultural change. We saw the opportunity to actually work with some of these faith leaders to do this. The other thing that faith institutions have going for them from our perspective is that they are in many communities one of the few remaining institutions that actually have infrastructure. And so they have physical space. They often have commercial kitchens. So these are places that faith communities, where people can come together around food. They can actually cook food and prepare it for large groups legally, which is also important. And then they also, many of them have cold storage capacity, strong volunteer corps, and the ability to really start movements around good food consumption and preparation in communities. So it's not just the function of the Black man per se, but it is the role of leaders within the African American community to come together and build movements around good food consumption, preparation, and community building. To be honest.
Thanks, Haile.
Yep.
Here's one for Kelvin. What role do you see HBCUs, or historically Black colleges and universities, playing in growing the food sovereignty or food justice movement in the United States? And if anyone else wants to add in as well.
Yes, HBCUs are probably like the leader in especially teaching young Black people about careers in agriculture. And I see them playing a strong role in food justice movement, especially for involving more Black leaders, young and old. So I definitely see them as an important part.
Thanks, Kelvin. How about one for Malik? This is one that came in fairly early. It's sometimes hard for our white comrades to understand and accept that this is a white supremacist country. What ways have you found to help explain this to them and that have been most successful?
the reality is I don't see my primary work as trying to help white people understand white supremacy and to heal from it. That's an important work that has to take place, but I don't see that as being my primary job. We have been involved in efforts such as in Detroit. We have a group called Undoing Racism in the Detroit Food System that meets monthly, and through either discussions or watching videos or having various other presentations, we examine white supremacy, how it impacts the food system specifically, and we place a lot of emphasis on individuals looking at how they unconsciously participate in this system. But my primary work really is trying to help my community, the African American community, heal from the impact of internalized racial oppression. And it's my view that that kind of teaching of white people about white supremacy should be done by our white allies. So often, what we find is that young whites who are sincere and want to impact change come to black communities or Latino communities in order to do the work, whereas there's a tremendous work that's needed to be done in white communities in trying to help inform white people about this system of white supremacy and help them see the ways in which they unconsciously participate and play into that system.
Thanks, Malik. Andrea, I'm going to pass it back over to you because we're just coming up to the top of the hour. And do we have time for any more questions here?
I want to take one more question that came through. Produce grown by black farm, want to address it. How do we connect South folks up with the Midwest folks?
I guess since I'm the only one in the Midwest, I'm assuming that question must have been directed to me. And let me say there has been some history. In particular, there was a brother who passed several years ago named Bomani Effinger, who worked with the Michigan Coalition of Black Farmers, and each month drove a truck back and forth to southern states in the United States and brought produce back himself as an individual. It's a tremendous undertaking. And so there has been some history of trying to build that relationship. Also, as I mentioned, the Michigan Coalition of Black Farmers has been involved in some exchanges, bringing sweet potatoes from the South and watermelons to Detroit. So there has been some of that, but the relationship is not as robust as it should be. I'm hoping that through young innovative farmers like Kelvin Graddick, that we're able to forge partnerships that ship some of the produce produced in the South, which can't be grown as readily in the North or can't be grown in certain seasons in the North, to urban areas in the North and the Midwest, so that we have this constant kind of interchange. And I'm hoping also that perhaps there are products that we can produce, we can grow in the North that don't grow as well in the South that we can ship back and forth. So we have really two things that we're balancing. Of course, all of us favor a more localized food system, getting food within 100, 200 miles of where people live. But then we have this additional consideration, and that is that how do we build kind of this black economy within the larger economy in American society. And so sometimes that will mean that we're importing or exporting things from one locale to the next, and perhaps they're not totally local, but they're meeting another consideration which is also important to us as a people.
Great.
Yeah.
We're going we've now kept you 2 minutes over, so just a couple of housekeeping issues. Stay tuned to all of the work of the fellows by checking in on the fellows' website, where they're always putting in new and exciting ideas and moving those forward, and you can dialogue with us there. Also, we're in the process of finishing up a series of articles with our partner, America's Wire, and we're going to be doing something on black men in the food system, and we'll be sending a link out to you when that is up. It'll be up there and on the fellows page. We thank you very much for joining us, and thank our 3 participants for being very insightful and candid about their work. Anything else, Abby? Any more housekeeping? I guess not. Well, we thank you.